All right, I think we're going to get started. There are many of you here. Thank you for joining us. Good afternoon, everyone. We are very excited to have you all here, and please use the chat to introduce yourselves to others in the space for the next few minutes as we get started. Once everyone has a chance to introduce themselves, we're going to disable the chat as we begin our presentation. Um, Please submit your questions using the Zoom feature as well. We will look to address those questions towards the end of the presentation, but feel free to add your questions as the presentation is going, and we will remind you throughout the presentation to be thinking of those questions and adding them in as well. So a little intro on RFA. For more than 30 years, Research for Action has served as trusted researchers and evaluators of education systems, initiatives, policies, and interventions. In 2021, under the direction of Dr. Kate Callahan, RFA embarked on a comprehensive strategic planning and culture building process to reify its commitment to building evidence to support systems change in education, uh, education to ensure that every student and family has the potential to achieve their potential and thrive. Through the strategic planning process, we have proposed new language to be confirmed by the end of the year, uh, which kind of starts to speak to our new mission statement. RFA conducts community engaged research and evaluations to propel transformative educational opportunities and outcomes for all students across their lifespan. We leverage anti racist research methodologies and cultivate partnerships to advance systems change through educational policies, programs, and practices. We focus on advancing educational equity with communities that have been actively discriminated against within the educational system. We see these communities as experts who have found creative ways to meet their educational needs within oppressive systems, and we seek to better understand and learn from them. We are passionate about the importance of high quality education for strengthening students, passionate about the importance of high quality of students, families, and their communities, and the need to advance racial and social justice in the systems that undermine equitable access to the resources people need to thrive. Today, I'm excited to have our RFA research team present on Small But Mighty, Lessons from Black Teachers' Experiences in Allegheny County. This report is RFA's latest addition to the research we've been producing on educators of color, Black teachers, and the broken teacher pipeline. This report not only highlights the lessons and experiences of Black teachers, but brings their voices to the front and center. Now to introduce our research team. We have our research analysis with us, Elisa Robinson and Kevin Burgess. We have our research associates, Saida Parks and Liana Cabral. Also with us, policy associate Mary Edens and director of policy David Lapp. We are also joined by DeQuindra Bertrand, RFA's communications director. As well, I am Saxon Nelson, the community engagement director for RFA. This work is supported by the Heinz Endowments, the McElhatton Foundation, and the Eden Hall Foundation. We thank you for your ongoing support to this important and critical work. And a bit of housekeeping before we officially begin. This webinar is being recorded and it will be sent to everyone who registered in the coming days. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with others, colleagues, or whomever. At the end of today's session, we will ask you to take a brief survey to offer feedback on this experience. We will probably drop the link in the chat towards the end of the presentation, and we strive to make these convenings as timely and relevant as possible. So thanks in advance and offering your observations and insights. I think I've checked all the boxes, and Saida, I will turn it to you.
Thank you, Saxon. Yes, we are very excited. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. So just yesterday, this report was released. Again, it's called Small But Mighty, Lessons from Black Teachers' Experiences in Allegheny County. And so we encourage you to, when you have a moment, go ahead and download this report. There's much more detail there than what we'll share with you today. So we really want you to dive in, engage with it, and really spend some time with it. But we're going to get into the the key findings from the report. So if you go to the next slide, please, DeQuindra. Thank you. So why did we conduct this study? We already know that Black teachers are leaving the profession in Allegheny County, which my colleague Mary will share more about. But unfortunately, we don't know enough about why Black teachers are leaving, and we don't have an understanding of their experiences. So we really wanted to learn directly from both current and former Black teachers in Allegheny County so that their experiences and their perspectives can really inform the changes that will help improve their experiences. And hopefully, the ultimate goal being to increase the numbers of Black teachers in Allegheny County. So I'll transition to Mary.
Thank you, Saida. DeQuindra, we can go to the next slide. Thanks. So just to set the stage and provide some additional context for the qualitative studies findings, I will briefly highlight a few important characteristics for the county's teacher and student demographics. For those either on now or watching a recording later that aren't familiar, Allegheny County is in the southwestern corner of the state of PA and is home to the city of Pittsburgh. We have 43 public school districts and 25 charter schools that serve approximately 145,000 students. Those schools employ approximately 10,000 teachers. In recent years, Research for Action has conducted quantitative analysis of both teacher and student demographics for the entire state, and we've zoomed in specifically on Allegheny County. Through this work, we have found a large and growing disparity between teacher and student demographics within the county's K-12 schools. So as you can see in this bar graph on the right, as of the 2022-2023 school year, 37.6% of the county's K-12 students identified as students of color, while only 4.6% of teachers identified as teachers of color. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this line graph shows how that disparity has in fact grown over time. You can see that the student and teacher demographics, or you can see here that the student teacher graphics in the past 10 years. Student demographics, we have about 30% of students identifying as students of color in 2013-14. That has grown to about 38% in the most recent year, while teachers of color has stayed relatively the same, fluctuating between just between 4.5 and 4.6%. Next slide, please. Thank you. So another important characteristic that can be masked when looking at only overall rate of teachers of color is that while the rate of teachers of color has stayed pretty consistent over the past 10 or so years, there has been a decline in both the share and the overall number of Black teachers specifically in the region. So in this figure, you can see that while the overall rate of teachers of color has stayed consistent, the share of Black teachers has actually declined by about 10%. Or in other words, the county schools employ 41 fewer Black teachers as of the last school year than in 2013-14, while the percentage of teachers identifying as Hispanic and Asian have actually increased. And next slide for me, DeQuindra. Thank you. We feel it is important to name that while the region has experienced major population loss for many decades, and recent reports have even identified specific concerns around the declining number of Black residents in the city of Pittsburgh, the loss of Black teachers has actually exceeded the loss of the overall Black population, both in the city of Pittsburgh and in the rest of Allegheny County. So as shown on this slide, the Black population in the city of Pittsburgh declined by about 10.3% from 2013 to 2021, while the Black population in Allegheny County's remaining communities has increased by about 7.6% in that same period. But in contrast, the number of Black teachers has declined at greater rates in both the city of Pittsburgh and the rest of Allegheny County. So this indicates that the demographic shifts in the broader community do not fully explain the decline in the number of Black teachers. The quantitative data presented here and included in RFA's portfolio of work puts a spotlight on a really critical issue facing our county schools, specifically highlighting the low recruitment and retention of Black educators. The numbers alone, however, do not provide insight on or explanation of why Black educators are leaving their roles or not entering our county's teacher workforce. So this data need really led RFA to conduct the Allegheny County Black Teacher Study. So I will turn it over to my colleague Alita to discuss more about how the study itself was structured.
Yep, we're going to talk a little bit about the research design and a little bit about our methodology. Next slide, please. So our work was guided by the research questions you see listed. We utilize a community engaged approach to the study, which my colleague Kevin will discuss just in a few. Our data collection included interviews, focus groups with current and former teachers. We also held one focus group with field leaders. Next slide, please. So we recruited a sample of Black teachers who represented various schools, districts, or LEAs. They had backgrounds in various experiences, years at their school, also grades and subjects. As mentioned previously, we held virtual interviews and focus groups. The bulk of our sample, roughly 65.5% of the current and former teachers came from PPS. And we are really grateful that we were able to talk to teachers in other districts and other charters as well. And now I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Kevin. So next slide, please.
So community involvement has been an indispensable part of the research design. So we had two advisory bodies, a Research Advisory Council, or RAC, and a Research Practice Learning Community, or RPLC, which informed our work throughout the project. We started with the RAC, which included community members who are in higher education and lead teacher diversity initiatives in the area. They gave us feedback on the sample, recruitment, and data collection instruments. It then evolved into the RPLC near the end of our data collection phase when two current teachers joined the group. Initially, the RPLC supported us during our final effort to recruit more participants, but once we finished with data collection, members reviewed and provided input on our data analysis, the findings, report draft, and recommendations. And they've also been part of ongoing conversations about how to best share our learnings with the broader community. And Liana will now talk a bit about those learnings.
Good afternoon. So a salient theme from this study centered around the unique, next slide. Thank you. A salient theme from this study centered around the unique contributions of Black teachers. While several participants emphasized that they work hard to ensure that they're meeting the needs of all of their students, they expressed that their commitment to Black students' learning is really important, especially given the historical and ongoing ways in which Black students' needs are often unmet in schools. In particular, teachers shared how they develop deep connections with their Black students and how their shared cultural backgrounds and experiences strengthens these connections. Black teachers also spoke of the importance of representation and serving as a role model to Black students in a school district with very few Black teachers. An additional theme was their shared pedagogical approaches, which were described as rooted in respect and in their belief in their students' abilities and potential. Next slide, please. Thank you. And we'll share some quotes throughout our findings in this presentation, but as Saida suggested, please download the report and you'll see many, many more quotes directly from our teachers. So here, I think we are small but mighty. You do not see as many Black educators come through. I think that being in this position, you kind of have to show that you belong here. Now, Black teachers, Black students hit it off. We are the same. We've been through the same things. It looks different for us. As Black educators, that means we also have to fill the shoes as the other teachers that are lacking in this area to build a rapport, to make them feel comfortable, to make them eager to learn, to make them want to come to school, to make them feel safe and comfortable in school. As this quote from a teacher exemplifies, even though teachers who identify as Black in Allegheny County comprise a small percentage of the teacher workforce, their impact is mighty, and for Black students in particular. Next slide, please. My pedagogy looks like this because of the students that I'm teaching. I have to be responsive to the students that I have. So teachers in this study had a really keen sense of culturally responsive practices and how they help them meet their students' interests and needs. Next slide, please. An additional key takeaway of this research focused on the unique challenges that Black teachers face as educators. And while this study is focused on Allegheny County, the alignment with existing literature underscores the systemic nature of Black teachers' challenges nationwide. Racial microaggressions were experienced most often by nearly all of the participants we spoke to. Unfair treatment and retaliation by administrators, sometimes carried out in response to Black teachers sharing feedback about administrative or school policies or advocating for racial equity. Many teachers spoke of the heavier workload that's often placed on Black teachers, and in particular, the expectation that they are best with managing difficult behaviors, and so they're given students with behavioral challenges. Teachers also share that they've been disillusioned by white teachers' treatment and lack of respect for Black children, their unwillingness to maintain high expectations for them, and their resistance to efforts to make curriculum more culturally responsive. Next slide, please. When you look at it, the system is just what you call tainted for Black people in general, a constant oppression of Black people. In teaching, I believe the system is so corrupt in terms of the mindset of white people that they don't want us here. This year, I had a colleague called me girl in a conversation. He kept referring to me as a girl. I teach kids that look like me, and so I'm invested. And the fact that colleagues seem so lost and are willfully ignorant, that hurts. But then when I have to deal with colleagues who are treating me less than, with the microaggressions and stuff like that, it makes the job 10 times harder to do, and I can just go find somewhere else to be. So many teachers describe the Allegheny County educational system as, quote, rooted in white supremacy and not built for Black teachers or Black students. Several teachers also spoke of feeling unwanted. And these quotes demonstrate the forces of systemic and interpersonal racism working together to create and maintain an environment that poses constant challenges for Black teachers. And Saida will now discuss additional challenges participants experienced.
Thank you. Exactly. So we heard from our participants that in addition to experiencing these challenges that they felt were really unique to Black teachers, they also experienced several other major challenges, which may be experienced by all types of teachers. But because they're already experiencing these challenges that are unique to them, these additional challenges kind of further impact their experiences and really contribute to Black teachers leaving the profession. And then I also want to just name that we think it's really important that these challenges were experienced within the context of Allegheny County, but they could apply to teachers in several other places. And so, you know, as we're just talking about these challenges, we think it's important to kind of think about what's happening in other contexts. If you're not in Pittsburgh, if you're not in Allegheny County, maybe how it may apply to your own context. So number one was a lack of support from school administration. This was a major reason for leaving the profession. And within that, behavior management was the most common area where teachers were looking for more support. But they were also looking for more support with things like training and mentorship, interactions with parents, and meeting or navigating district or LEA mandates and requirements. I just want to also name that lack of support they experienced really contributed to kind of an overall negative school culture, which kind of impacted their experience as well. Number two was a lack of resources and supports for students. Classrooms lacked basic tools like pencils and paper, and often teachers were providing these materials out of their own pocket. Overwhelming workload. As Liana mentioned earlier, Black people experienced a heavier workload than their peers, but participants also shared that more generally, the workload was a challenge because of factors like the number of classes that they teach, the number of students that they teach, even the breadth of the classes that they were required to teach, and then also the mandates and requirements from the district or LEA. So that kind of goes into the next one, issues with district or LEA policies and mandates. So teachers feel that they're not able to offer the curriculum their students need in the way that they believe the students need it because of the limitations from the district. They didn't have enough autonomy. The next would be instability or unpredictability due to staffing policies and turnover. So a few teachers mentioned that issues with policies and practices around hiring, staffing, and promotions or raises within the district caused some tension or some challenges. Some schools were short-staffed, while at the same time, participants felt that finding a school that was a good fit was also difficult. And a few mentioned that principal turnover really led to feelings of instability within their school. And then the next would be inadequate pay. Participants expressed that they did not receive fair compensation for the work that they were doing, and that the teaching salary really wasn't sufficient for covering their living expenses. A few Black teachers shared that their districts or LEAs pay them less than their white peers who were at the same level of education or experience. And then the last would be challenges related to the pandemic. So several participants kind of mentioned changes like requiring less homework or giving more time to complete assignments, which occurred during the pandemic and really may have been necessary for the time. But these changes are kind of lingering, and teachers feel that they're now contributing to overall lowered expectations of academic performance for students. And then they also noted some changes in student behavior and the fact that they feel students have more emotional needs stemming from the pandemic, but don't really have the resources or the support to address that. So next slide, please. So this is a quote from an educator who felt like because of the lack of support, they kind of needed to fill the gaps by offering what the schools weren't offering. We wear many hats as educators. Sometimes a parent, a support system, a role model, a therapist. We wear these many hats. So it can be overwhelming as well, because I feel like sometimes there are not enough supports in the schools to serve all of our students. Okay, next slide, please. And then the third takeaway, basically we learned from our teachers that despite all of these challenges that they've been facing, many of them plan to stay in the profession. We decided to ask participants why they decide to remain, and they shared several factors that kind of contribute to their desire to continue teaching. A major factor was teachers' love of students. Teachers love working with students. They enjoy playing a role in students' growth and their success. They found it really rewarding and motivating. And several interviewees expressed an appreciation for the meaningful, intentional relationships that they built with those students. They expressed that really students are the reason that they keep going. In addition, strong school leaders were another factor that really retained or sustained them. So a few participants did have positive experiences in their schools, and they spoke about the impact of school culture and good relationships with colleagues and school administrators. So strong leaders exhibited practices like showing appreciation for their work, investing in their professional growth, and advocating for them. And then supportive and affirming networks. As we know, participants expressed that teaching is an emotionally, physically, and cognitively demanding job. The opportunity to work with supportive groups and networks of educators helped them feel valued and empowered. So this was especially true of groups created specifically for Black educators, as they found them to be safe spaces where they experienced, less interpersonal racism and where they could share liberatory practices and work toward racial equity. And then I believe the last being investment in their careers. So the reality is that many teachers have made a significant financial and temporal investment in their teaching career, and they name that they have financial responsibilities. Many of them were parents, and those responsibilities would preclude them from leaving their stable paycheck and their benefits. So we can go to the next slide. I'll share another quote. So this participant felt supported and affirmed through the opportunity to work with groups that focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion in their districts. So they said, I feel like I can be my authentic self, my authentic Black self here in a way that I didn't feel in other districts. I've done a lot of DEI work across the district. At one point, another woman and myself were leading the DEI work across the charter network. We have a partnership with the Teacher Diversity Initiative in the region that I am the representative on that team. Here, I feel like being a culturally responsive practitioner and all of that, this is the first place where I feel that that's mattered. And the next slide, please. So another participant described their students and the opportunity to serve as a model for them is the reason that they remain in the profession. So they said, last year was my first year, so some students didn't know me. And they would be like, are you a teacher here? You're a teacher? And I'm like, yeah. And at one point, one of the students just started clapping and was like, yes, we need some Black teachers. We have a Black teacher. And I was just like, wow. And to see them just be so happy about it, and for them to know that this is a good thing, and just to not hide it, to be proud about it, and be like, yes, we need more Black teachers, was definitely a plus. It's definitely what keeps me. Thank you. So we're going to transition to Kevin, who's going to talk about some recommendations that were developed from these findings.
Thanks, Aida. And before I discuss the recommendations, I just wanted to let everyone know that we'll transition to the Q&A portion of the presentation right after this. So if you would just please start putting your questions in the Q&A panel now, and we'll begin to organize them. So thank you for that. As noted earlier, community input permeated all aspects of the project, and the recommendations section is no exception. During interviews and focus groups, current and former teachers offered their perspectives on the changes that are needed. And additionally, in our work with the RPLC, they developed a few strategies that would lead to the desired changes. And these recommendations were categorized based on the stakeholder group they believe should act on them. This list isn't exhaustive, and there will be further sense making that takes place with the RPLC in ongoing meetings. So we urge you to spend some time delving into the categorized recommendations in the report and consider how they might apply to your particular context. And now I'll pass it to my colleague, Sax.
All right. Thank you. So we will look to now transition to the Q&A portion so far. So far we have one question that's been submitted from the group. So we'll look to answer that, and feel free to submit your questions as we go. We have a few other questions coming in now as well. So this is great. All right. So first question that I will transition to. I want to read it out here out loud. Such an important and timely needed report. Thank you all. Can you talk a bit more about racial microaggressions that Black teachers experienced? Were they perpetuated by fellow teachers or by students towards Black teachers? Were there microaggressions among students observed by the participating teachers? So feel free to come on camera, guys, and Saida, I'll turn that question to you. I can read it again as well, if that helps.
I think I understand it. I'll definitely start to respond, and then if any of the other research team members want to chime in, please do. So from what we heard from teachers, for the most part, the racial microaggressions were coming from their colleagues, from other teachers, most of them being white teachers that they worked with, and some from school leaders or administrators as well. Really, when the Black teachers talked about their relationships with students, they talked about students very positively. They talked about the strengths of their relationships with students, being able to pour into them. So we didn't hear much from Black teachers in terms of like mistreatment or racial microaggressions from students. It was coming a lot from colleagues.
Yeah, and I would just add that, some of the examples, and again, this also is included in the report, but some of the examples included offensive comments, unwanted touching. Several participants talked about their colleagues touching their hair. Overall, not feeling like they were being taken seriously as professionals, or feeling like they had to be the spokesperson for all Black people, or take on the role of organizing all of the cultural events, MLK Day events, things like that. And then another, they also mentioned some microaggressions or sometimes overt expressions of racism coming from parents not wanting them to teach their student. So feeling like they didn't have the ability to be a strong teacher. And several actually shared that once they got more of a reputation in the school, parents were like, oh, they're good. I actually do want my student in their classroom. But having this initial, when they first joined, having several parents shift their students out of their classroom were some examples.
Great. I think I want to make sure, am I echoing? Want to just testify? Am I going to sound
yeah,
good?
still echoing.
Still echoing. Okay. Mary, do you want to share the next question? Just as I think I'm saying.
Yes, I will. Do I sound okay? Fine. Okay. Let me get this up. Okay, so we have another question that I think is a good follow-up to that for the whole research team. This participant or attendee is asking that, well, they share a little bit of context too, that they know that there is a lot around recruitment efforts, but they're wondering if agency, voice, respect, etc. Sorry, let me say this again. they're noting that agency, voice, respect, etc., are tools for retention, and are wondering if there was a correlation that you saw in the research amongst those things.
Sorry, does that's speaking to the correlation?
I think the question is
with
around,
recruitment.
did agency, voice, respect contribute to the retention? So some of those sustaining factors, like did that emerge in the findings?
Okay. I think maybe more anecdotally in a few participants' interviews, really the patterns in terms of what sustained and retained Black teachers that we saw were around, kind of like we mentioned earlier, the opportunity to work with students and contribute to their growth, strong leaders and positive school culture, supportive and affirming networks, and investment in their careers. And so I think like some of that, the voice especially is something that likely showed up in the spaces like the affirming networks or groups they were able to participate in. They talked about, you know, feeling safer there and having the opportunity to connect with other Black teachers. But in terms of agency and voice and respect, specifically showing up as patterns, we didn't necessarily see that. I do think that shows up somewhat in our recommendations because we felt that that was related to what we were hearing from Black teachers, and that kind of demonstrating more respect for Black teachers and giving them autonomy would be a useful strategy in terms of retention.
Yeah, I would also just say that I agree with Saida that when we asked what, you know, factors they feel like support their retention, they didn't necessarily name those specific words, but in some of the challenges that they talked about, what, you know, the lack of respect was certainly there, and the ability to a lot of them did this anyway, but you know, making sure that their curriculum was and pedagogical practices were responsive and curriculum culturally responsive was key. And so having the agency to do that, and several felt like they kind of just had to claim and take that agency, that it wasn't necessarily always given, but they wanted to do that because they knew that that was what was best for their students. So I would say like, yes, but as Aida mentioned, it wasn't like a direct correlation. But teachers generally, in all of the studies we've heard, feel disrespected and want to be respected. And that would certainly keep them in the profession, I would say.
Okay, another question came in asking, did Black teachers talk at all about the role of Black principals or other leaders in mitigating negative experiences at school?
I would say somewhat. They did. There was the finding around, you know, strong school leaders. And I think there were a few participants, again, this is more anecdotal because we didn't see this show up as a stronger pattern. So that's why it wasn't included like as a major finding. But there were some stories about participants who had Black principals or had Black mentors or something like that, were able to be in a space with a Black veteran teacher or part of a group for Black educators where they felt much more supported. But in terms of seeing a pattern with a kind of, as it was put, Black school leaders mitigating the challenges, I don't think that we saw that as much. I'll open it up to my research team in case you have any other ideas about it, but it didn't show up as like a key finding for us.
I would agree that it didn't show up as a key finding, but did show up in a couple of interviews where folks felt when they felt supported by leadership, they felt better in the school and more. There was actually one interview I remember where a teacher was dealing with backlash from parents around teaching specific, you know, culturally responsive pedagogies, and the principal like had their back. And so I think there were some examples of that, but not enough. And that is certainly a question I'm eager to explore in future research. I think school leaders like mediating some of this and preventing some of it is key. Thanks for the question.
All right, one more sound check. How am I sounding?
You still got that echo.
Echoing.
All right, Mary, we're gonna pass my
You're echoing for us, but maybe you're not echoing for the audience.
We did get a note in the Q&A that it seems like there's an echo for audience too. Sorry, Saxon. All right, I'll do my best to step into this role. All right, next question. So have you picked up on any differences among early or late career Black teachers' experiences or their desire to stay or leave their jobs? So this question is really around tenure, and among the sample, were there differences between those early and later career teachers?
That's a good question. I think given our sample size, we didn't really have much opportunity to kind of, like disaggregate data based on number of years of experience. But I will say, related to that key takeaway, the third one about what retains and sustains Black teachers, I guess it speaks more to the retaining than the sustaining, but teachers really did speak to the fact that they feel like they've put so much into their career. They've gotten certifications, they've earned degrees, they've put in the time, they've built relationships with students. And so kind of, I think basically the number of years, the amount of time that they had put in, they did see that as a reason to stay in the profession. I know that doesn't speak specifically to your question, but I do think that for folks, especially who had put in a good number of years, walking away from the profession was not something they saw as an option at that point. So kind of a non-answer, but that's the connection that we have in our data to that question.
Okay, we have another question around, there's a few questions that have emerged around the sample size. So if the research team could just note whether there's any concern around the level of representation, the accuracy of results, or just like give some insight into the sample size and what that can represent and how those findings can be used.
Yeah, so we were really proud of our sample, including our sample size. I think because we really designed this to be a qualitative study, for us, it was really important to focus on the lived experience of the participants as well as their perspectives. And so with interviews and with focus groups with qualitative data, it kind of becomes less about a specific number and more about kind of looking for the patterns in the data and understanding where we're seeing kind of consensus between folks' experiences and perspectives. So with our sample size, we did get to a point where we kind of felt like we were reaching saturation, where we felt like there were key themes that were emerging from the data. And we felt like we definitely had enough data from our participants to kind of support the findings that we put forth in the report. We would love to continue this work, and we would love to have more representation from more districts, from more Black teachers in other regions even. But I think specifically for this region and for the number of Black teachers that are in the region, being able to speak to the number of Black teachers that we spoke with, we were really excited about. And also just want to give a shout out to them. We were really grateful for their time and the fact that they were so open with us and really willing to share their experiences. So yes, thank you for the question. I do think we have if there's interest in that, we can share a slide that has a table that breaks down the sample a little bit more. It just shows years of experience and gender, and then we could share those numbers again that Alita had shared earlier in terms of our sample. I'll just name again. So our sample was 29 current teachers and 9 former teachers. And then we had also conducted a focus group with 6 field leaders of teacher diversity initiatives in the area. That focus group informed the recommendations quite a bit. But returning to the teachers, so we had representation from 23 different Pittsburgh public schools. 4 other Allegheny County districts were included. There were 4 different charters or charter networks included, and then the teachers represented every grade from K to 12 and multiple subjects, and that includes specials and electives and CTE.
And those details are in the report itself. So if you look at the appendix, you can find the visual that Saida was referencing and more details, and just really drive home that, 38 participants for a county where there were only 362 Black teachers as of last year is really great. And we were able to really hear so many rich experiences from those 38 participants. Another question came in asking, were there any findings about the role of affinity groups in Black teacher retention?
Yes, I'm not sure if Kevin wants to speak more to this, but I'll just say that finding around, again, the key takeaway with retaining and sustaining Black teachers, when I kind of talked about the groups or the spaces that Black teachers felt were really affirming for them and really supportive, that included affinity groups. So some of them did have an opportunity to participate in like Black affinity spaces in their district, and they did feel like that definitely helped to sustain them.
Yeah, I think that pretty much covers what people were talking about. I do think, in general, people were saying how restorative those group spaces were, and so just having an opportunity to vent or to have someone celebrate you, and based on like what we were talking about in the report with the microaggressions and all of that, it was just a very restorative and space where people felt comfortable, and so I would just say that.
Awesome. Next question, did any of the participants discuss the role or support of the union and their union leadership in their decisions to stay or leave the profession?
So our study didn't ask specifically about the role of unions. We did have some data. Again, we kind of see it as anecdotal because there were just a few stories here and there where unions came up. It didn't come up in the data enough to demonstrate a pattern, but there were experiences. For example, there was a teacher who talked about the fact that they were at a charter school and they were trying to unionize, and they felt like their school leadership was acting punitively, kind of retaliating against them because the teachers were unionizing. But the data didn't really speak directly to a relationship between unions and the decline in Black teachers in the region. So from our teachers' reflections, we feel confident in saying that it was the challenges they experienced as the major factor that led to attrition.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Given the, actually, hold on one second. Okay, how do the results from the Allegheny County study compare to Philadelphia or other cities?
Sorry, I was typing in a response. Yes, so we conducted a similar study in Philadelphia among Black teachers and found very similar findings. I think a key difference from Allegheny County and Philadelphia are that there are more Black teachers. It's a different context, but the challenges were very similar. And overall, the feeling of not feeling like appreciated or wanted or respected was like the icing on the cake to all of the other challenges, like lack of resources, having, feeling like they had to take on more work. And so the challenges were certainly very similar, as well as the unique contributions. And we also just completed a PAR study, which is Participatory Action Research Project with Black teachers in Philadelphia and Detroit. And we were analyzing the data from this study and that study around the same timeline. And it was like fascinating to see how much they were in conversation with one another, particularly around the commitment Black teachers have to their Black students, and how they see their role as a calling, and how it's really not just isolated to their connection within the classroom, but those relationships move far beyond that into, you know, outside of school and throughout life, and how just invested they are in their students, the high expectations that they hold for their students, the belief that they know that their students can excel, and they want to be a part of that. So yeah, so many shared findings. And then also just in the research, you know, before beginning any research process, you really delve into past studies and the research, so you know what has already been learned, and you know what's out there. And so when we were, you know, we were reviewing that and then doing this research, those things were also in conversation with one another.
Thank you, Liana. All right, another question. This is a great question. I'm not sure how much information we have on this, but what proportion of the teachers were homegrown versus coming from outside of the region? Do you know how many grew up in Allegheny County?
That is a good question. We don't have the numbers on that. I will say there were at least a couple of participants that came from outside of the region, but we didn't necessarily collect and document that in terms of the numbers that were originally from Allegheny County or came from outside of it.
I would also add a lot of participants like talked about like why it was important for them to be a Black teacher and to be from and within the community, because a lot of them shared going to the store and seeing like, you know, their students, having those small conversations with their parents, and that kind of emphasized and made them feel like, you know, valued, having that community connection. But we don't have the actual numbers of how many, but a lot of them did share about that experience.
Thank you, Alita and Saida. This came up in a few different ways, but wondering if there's any consideration about repeating this work with Black and African American principals, given the findings.
I added a comment into the chat, and absolutely, I think that that's the logical next step. That question comes up all the time. It's a question that we had among with the teachers in the PAR group. They wanted to look at teachers and leadership, but we just didn't have the time or resources to explore both. So that's absolutely a future study that we'd love to conduct. I know there's funders on this call, so you know, reach out if you'd love to support that work. But yeah, I think that, and there aren't as many studies working with either leaders in general or, you know, Black leaders in particular, and how they might mediate these experiences. Could we also respond to the charter school question that's up there? I think that's a really good one.
Yeah, that was my next one.
I'll kick it off, but I feel like other folks on the team will have a response to this. But the comment is, I noted one of your quotes is from a charter school teacher. Do you have any insights about whether charter schools might provide a more affirming and positive space, being outside of a large, long-standing school system? I think that, you know, that question, the response is complicated and depends on the context. In the Allegheny County study, I would say that, you know, there's a specific charter school network. I don't know if I can call it out now or not, but in any case, I'll hold off on doing that. Teachers shared really positive experiences within that network. Not, you know, there were challenges, but I think overall we heard more positive experiences from teachers within that network. And that was because that specific network was really doing intentional work around this. And I think, yeah, sometimes if you're able to, if it's like a smaller scale and you're putting resources towards it, paying attention to it, being mindful of it, being intentional, then the work can be addressed more meaningfully. Would anyone else like to answer that question or say more?
I think that covers it.
Okay, the next question, can you share more about the participants' interest in encouraging their own students to enter the career of teaching?
That's a great question. It's something that we have thought about in other research studies we've done. So I think that, I think Liana mentioned earlier our participatory action research study with Black teachers in Philly and Detroit. And that did come up in the data there. We actually specifically asked Black teachers about encouraging students to go into the profession and why they think that they are or are not. So I'm not sure what the best way is to share more information about that study, Liana. But in terms of the data for this study, that didn't really show up in the data for this research.
I would also want to add that, not to plug our report again, but once you guys have a chance to go back into the report, there are a lot of organizations that within this research, we did learn that are doing work around the educator diversity. So I think it's important to note and also plug those organizations as well. But we didn't really focus on like that particular aspect for this study, but it is important to note that this research did help us understand what's going on in the education diversity space, particularly for Black teachers. So definitely check it out in the report.
Okay, I think we have time for one more. I think this is a good transition to our closing. But now that the report has been released, what comes next?
Yeah, thank you. So there are several steps we believe are coming next that we're excited about. We really want to continue engaging several different stakeholder groups with the findings and the recommendations from the report. So if you have ideas about individuals or groups that we should be engaging with, that we should share the report with, please let us know. We're also hoping to develop additional products. We want the findings and the recommendations to be more accessible. We'd rather not just, end here with a traditional research report, but we want to engage audiences beyond a typical research audience. So we're hoping to produce additional products, things that incorporate audio, perhaps visuals, things like that. So please stay tuned for any updates. Those things are possibly on the horizon. We're also going to continue our partnership with PEDC, as well as our work with the research practice learning community. So they'll continue to advise us on dissemination for this report, engaging different communities, etc. And then we also have a few presentations coming up. We'll be at the Black Men in Education convening in Philly this weekend. So if you'll be there, please look for us. It will also be at AERA in April. And then lastly, we're planning a convening for spring 2024. We're not able to share full details for that yet, but again, please stay tuned. I think Saxon will probably mention that also. So if that's our last question, Mary, and if Saxon's audio is good, I think we can transition to him.
We can try. How does it sound?
It sounds good.
All
Sounds
right.
great.
The old leave and come back option. It finally worked out for me. So just in closing, please, we're going to reopen the chat to drop the survey link into the chat. So please look to the chat application in Zoom to get access to the survey. And again, yes, spring 2024, we will be having a teach-in in Allegheny County. We're super excited about it. We can't mention any more than that, but very, very excited. And also just want to mention again that we did record this webinar, and we will share it with everyone who's been registered, and we welcome for folks to share that out as well. And then lastly, I think we're just going to close out with the contact slide, a slide of contact information for us at RFA. So if you have any questions, if you want to continue this conversation, feel free to reach out to us right there. And thank you so much for everyone attending and for staying for us through this entire time. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I don't know if we dropped the survey link in. Up there it is. Survey link has been dropped into the chat. So please, again, feel free to access the survey. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate it.